Good morning, brothers. Welcome to Soularize. This is the opening ritual that we will be entering into this time with. So, why don't we just take a few moments to just sort of gather ourselves? We just had centering prayer, but to just take a few deep breaths.
Hermanos, bienvenidos a Soularize del 2021. Vamos a entrar juntos a este espacio sagrado, este espacio virtual que hemos creado. Vamos a respirar en este ritual profunda e intencionalmente.
So, this opening ritual will be centered on grief. The last 2 years have been something that we probably never anticipated happening. A world pandemic during our lifetime that pretty much kept us in a lot of places like isolation, quarantine, encouragement to stay away physically from one another. We saw lots of tensions, race, relations in different parts of the world, in immigration, different areas of the world have suffered. We've seen great fires and great cataclysmic events in terms of hurricanes and things of natural disasters that have happened as well. And we've seen continued destruction of the environment.
Este rito, hermanos, se va a enfocar en el duelo. Hemos sufrido algo inesperado en estos 2 últimos años. Pandemia mundial que ha afectado todas las partes, todas las dimensiones de nuestra vida. Hemos tenido pérdidas inesperadas, hemos sufrido aislamientos, tensiones raciales, violencias, hemos sufrido asuntos de inmigración, desastres naturales, cataclísmicos.
So now's a time for us to sort of get in touch with those things that we have lost these last 2 years, to give them the space that they need to be given in order for us to enter into this time together of Soularize in a more open and a more empty way.
En este ritual démosle cabida, démosle la bienvenida al dolor, a nuestros sentimientos de pérdida y de duelo.
So this ritual will be very simple. First of all, we asked you to bring a bowl of water. Second of all, we asked you to bring a leaf. This is a dead leaf that I found in my backyard. This particular ritual will be done to music, and while the music is going on, we will simply be dipping the leaf into the water. The water is representative of the tears. The leaf is us and everyone who is grieving. We are in connection with that. We are in connection with one another because we are doing this ritual at the same time together.
Vedran Smoljevic is a Bosnian conductor, musician, and performer. During the siege of Sarajevo, some 20 years ago, he played Albanone's Adagio in G minor in ruined buildings, and often under the threat of snipers. Smoljevic caught the imagination of people around the world by playing his cello, performing Albanone's Adagio in G minor for 22 days. in the ruined square of a downtown Sarajevo marketplace after a mortar round had killed 22 people waiting for food there.
Mientras escuchamos el adagio de Albinoni en sol menor, recordemos que fue una pieza musical que en 1992 Vedran Slamovic interpretó con su violonchelo durante 22 días en la plaza en ruinas de un mercado en el centro de Sarajevo, después de que una ronda de morteros matara a 22 personas que esperaban comida.
So you would dip the leaf into the water, get it really fully wet. Do it very contemplatively. And then lift it up very slowly. And just let the water drip off the leaf into the bowl of water. And as you're doing so, get in contact with those things that you need to grieve, those losses, whether they be personal, whether they be in the community, in the country, in the world, wherever it might be, in the environment. Connect with that, because we're all grieving together. We're all in solidarity together when we grieve together. Again, you put the leaf in the water, you bring it out, you just watch as tears drop into the bowl.
Muy contemplativamente escuchemos esa pieza musical y al hacerlo, cojamos nuestras hojas y empapándolas con el agua, levantémoslas y veamos cómo cada gota cae sobre el agua. Hagamos esto una y otra vez y que cada gota que derramemos sobre el agua signifique nuestras lágrimas, nuestro dolor, nuestras pérdidas. Hagamos esto de una manera contemplativa. Y si te sientes conmovido, menciona esa pérdida, aislamiento, muerte, enfermedad, racismo, discriminación.
You don't have to think about anything. All you have to do is just do the motion while the music is playing. Go to the entirety of the music, doing this simple ritual of lifting the leaf out of the water, letting the drips come down into the bowl, continuing to do that motion. And then when the music is ended, then go ahead and we will return.
Hagamos esto durante la duración de la pieza musical y al terminar volvemos a nuestra próxima sesión.
Morning, brothers. Good evening in some places of the world, maybe good morning. Morning itself. My name is Steve Hicken. I'm the current board chair of Illuman, and I have the privilege and the honor of welcoming us all to this space of Soularize, though I do want to point out that before the words came the silence. We sat together. After the silence came the ritual that together, thank you, Giovanni and Joe, for leading us into that, opened a space. So the words come third. Third come the words. We have words, but the space of Soularize is one that we've all collectively just opened together. Soularize is a space that for some 20 years, men have gathered together. I think, as Jim Heaney mentioned early on, Richard Rohr said very early on as we were gathering, if God wants this to grow, it will grow. And 20 years later, we're here and we're holding this thread that's been carrying forward throughout these years. And Soularize is a time when we throw our net wide as we can to connect with men throughout the world who somehow are captivated by the mystique and the promise that Illuman and all of our partner organizations around the world are pursuing and building together. So thank you for being here. Thank you. And the theme, connecting through COVID, the original theme that the group, the planning council that we call it, had imagined for Soularize was going to be connecting after COVID, but COVID didn't go away. COVID's still here. And that contributes to our grief. So the group retitled in an incredibly appropriate way, connecting through COVID, and you can think about that in a couple of different ways. I do want to clearly, if this is not a time for trumpets to be sounding, or Hollywood kind of stages with lights flashing and beautiful music, people dancing and steam going off the stages. It's not like that at all. This is a very different space and time that we're in, and we're going to hold that space together. It's more of the energy of a vigil. We're not inert in our vigil, and I'll be mentioning a little bit later many of the ways that through resilience, our men continue to connect and build together. But let's hold this space together. And I'm reminded, one of our beautiful brothers who's here today mentioned in a council about a month ago or so, that when his young son passed away, early on at the funeral, many people offered help. And he received their offerings, though it didn't really connect with what he needed or was living at the time. And later on, there was a memorial service, and that did connect, because what he connected with at the time were people simply came together to witness his loss. And I thought, and that those words have stayed with me. And I think what we're gathering together is to witness together the loss that we and our loved ones and our whole world is currently experiencing. It's the witness. Let me read, I'm going to read our mission, and I'll read our welcome, because these form the centerpieces. And I will mention a little bit of a piece of the work that we're doing on anti-racism work. Then we'll pass it along. I'll pass it along to John Ball to continue with our Soularize vigil and reflections together. We are men transforming men through a power greater than ourselves. We are men transforming men through a power greater than ourselves. We are seeking a life-changing spirituality. Our primary concern is inner work that makes a difference in the world. We are fed by the wisdom traditions of forgiveness and radical inclusivity. Our work recovers traditional patterns of male initiation, affirms a masculine path to healing, reveals the true and false self, and honors the path of descent. And we do this through the power of nature, ritual, image, story, and through counsel. And now our welcome. Our welcome to all of us, and our welcome to all men who are seeking a spiritual path of healing. As a fellowship for men's spirituality, we welcome men from all parts of the world, of African descent, of Asian descent, of European descent, Latin American descent, First Nations descent in this land and abroad, native born and people of mixed and multiple descents and all languages. We say welcome. And when I say we say welcome, please repeat. We say welcome.
We say welcome.
We welcome men on all parts of the continuum of gender identity and expression without prejudice about sexual orientation, living status, whether he's sexually active or celibate, and everyone for whom those labels don't apply. We say
Welcome.
Welcome.
we welcome people with all physical abilities and challenges, those living with any chronic medical condition, visible or invisible. We say
Welcome.
Welcome.
we welcome people who identify as activists and those who don't, mystics, believers, seekers of all kinds, people of all ages, and all who make it possible to participate in this work. We say
Welcome.
we welcome all emotions, joy, fear, grief, contentment, disappointment, surprise, and all else that flows through us. We say
Welcome.
we welcome our families, biological and otherwise, those dear to us who have died, our ancestors, and the future ones, the ancestors who live in this land, in this place, where these buildings that we're in now, we honor them through this work that we are undertaking. We say,
Welcome.
we welcome brothers who feel broken, lost, and struggling, who suffer from self-doubt and self-judgment. We say,
Welcome.
we welcome the plants who sustain us and give us our very life. May they be safe. May they be protected. May they be honored. We say,
Welcome.
the world of earth, of rocks, stones, and sand, the foundation upon which we stand, may all these be safe, be protected, be honored. We say,
Welcome.
world of water that courses through the veins of every living thing and sustains the earth upon which we depend for our very survival. May it be safe, protected, be honored. We say,
Welcome.
we welcome all beings that inhabit this earth, human or otherwise, the two-legged, the four-legged, winged and finned, those that walk, fly, and crawl above the ground and below, in air and in water. To these we say,
Welcome.
so welcome to all of these, and welcome, brothers, to our Soularize space. I did want to mention one last thing, because in a Soularize around 5 or 6 years ago, we began in an explicit way our work to build belonging, diversity across Illuman a couple of years ago. I remember there were some men at Soularize said, well, okay, we said we were working on this, so what's going on? And I took that as a call and an encouragement. This work is going forward. It's going to take some time, but we are engaged. And I did want to read, there's a statement on racism that you'll find on the Illuman website. And I did want to repeat the last line of this together here, because it does set the stage for the work that we have before us. The last line of that statement reads like this. We say, this would be Illuman, we say the powers of racism and white supremacy have been present from the very foundation of our nation and continue to cause suffering and alienation. They thrive in an atmosphere which denies that our wealth and privilege derive in large part from the genocide and enslavement and exploitation of peoples. We Illuman brothers commit ourselves and our community to the work of witnessing, acknowledging, and healing the trauma caused by these injustices. Brothers, these are strong words. We need strong words now, and we need strong men to speak those words, to embody them, both within Illuman, among men in our societies, families, in our nations and communities. To do that, to really be those strong men, we also have to embrace our grief. We have to embrace the grief, because the strength that comes from that deep rootedness comes from the strength that, I think it was Jim Heaney mentioned a little bit earlier. I loved it. It was like you have to do your inner work before you can be fully present. So that's what we're doing here. And so that brings us back to the theme of grief together. It's a time of grief. It's a time of vigil. We will hold that together. We will hold that digitally, in the hopes that soon enough we'll be able to get together in person and physically hold each other, hold the space, roll around on the floor like little puppies, you know, in the simple joy of being present together. But that's not yet. That's not yet. We'll hold this space. We're strong to do that. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for creating this space together through silence, through ritual, sharing, speaking, counsel. We'll have all those moments throughout this Soularize. I'll turn it over now to John Ball. Take us to our next segment. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, man.
Morning.
It's wonderful seeing your faces this morning, and I'm so glad that you have joined us today for this Soularize. Father Richard says, the pain that we do not transform, we will transmit. And so, as you've heard, our topic for the first session of Soularize is all about identifying our losses, connecting with our grief, how we process it, and in doing so, how we transform our pain. And I'll be clear with you that, you know, I'm grieving that for another year we were unable to gather together again in New Mexico. You know, and there's a lot of loss around that for me. Also, we had to postpone our men's rite of passage that was scheduled for the East Coast in Johnsonburg, New Jersey. We have rescheduled it for the first week in May, but you know, we put a lot of effort into it, so there's a lot of grief around that. But I think it also was the right decision. So our original plan for this plenary was to offer a live presentation featuring Glenn Siegel, Bob Sabbath, Terry Chapman, and I in a panel discussion on the topic of grief. But Bob and Terry were not able to be here with us today, so we pre-recorded our presentation instead. And I hope that you will find it to be helpful to you. And so, Andy, if you would like to cue up the video, and then we'll come back afterwards.
Alexa, do I have any notifications?
Welcome, brothers. Before we begin, I'd like for you quickly to introduce yourselves.
Well, brothers, I'm Terry Chapman in Lenoka Harbor, New Jersey. I'm Bob Sabbath. I'm in Mount Rainier, Maryland.
And I'm Glenn Siegel in Fayetteville, Arkansas.
I'm John Ball in St. Mary's City, Maryland. Brothers, the theme of this year's Soularize is connecting through COVID, embracing our lives, each other, and the world. And during this last year and a half, we've all encountered the challenges caused by the pandemic, and we've experienced some loss, significant loss, and grief. So how have you dealt with those challenges and the losses that you've encountered? How have you grieved them? How have you stayed connected?
Well, I can step in. Thank you. Thank you, John. It's really good to be in circle with all you brothers. Wish we could, of course, we all wish we could be there in person so we could be dancing and hugging and sharing our physical presence. This has been, for all of us, a threshold or liminal place in our lives as individuals, as councils and groups, and as really a planet. And it's an opportunity to, as Francis Willer describes, become apprentices to sorrow, because it has much to teach us. One of my favorite poets is the poet Denise Levertov, and I'd love to share a short poem. Ah, grief, I should not treat you like a homeless dog who comes to the back door for a crust, for a meatless bone. I should trust you. I should coax you into the house and give you your own corner, a worn mat to lie on, your own water dish. That's Denise Levertov from Talking to Grief. Indeed, it feels to me like in this time, in my own life and collectively, grief is like the guardian dog of thresholds, like a faithful companion along the way of all these changes that we're experiencing, like a century of the territory between places, between identities and roles and seasons. And we're in that place together, brothers. It's, for me, this whole, I guess it's 2 years, over 2 years now, I don't know, I'm kind of in a time warp somewhat, has felt like just this liminal place, this invitation, like a threshold. And strangely, in some ways, when I lean in, I actually feel more alive. I feel this invitation coming from spirit, from the universe, from the divine, to open up my heart even wider. So I'd just like to name in just a couple minutes 3 thresholds that I encounter, and I think they're archetypal thresholds that perhaps we all encounter, and grief that meets me there. And the first is the threshold between the story that I'm living in, that is too small for my soul's longing. And if anything, COVID has done that. You know, the story that we're living in, perhaps collectively, is too small. And so this invitation, and I'm not saying that God has caused this, you know, to teach us a lesson, but it is an invitation for us to open up our hearts. So one encounter with grief at a threshold of a too small of a story was when my son came out as gay, when he was about 15 years old. I had no idea my son was gay. My wife's a psychologist, I'm a Presbyterian minister, and neither of us had a clue. And so it came as a real surprise to us that he was gay, just announced it one day, and we're like, oh, wow, you know. And it opened something in me. Fortunately, as Parker Palmer suggests, I had exercised my heart over the LGBTQI community over many years. And so when my son came out as gay, my heart was broken open, but not shattered. It was broken open to love. And so there was grief there because I had to let go of my virtual story of my son's life, which was too small because it wasn't real. I had to let go of that for the real story. And I encountered grief there, and it opened up my heart. And I still have residual grief. It's not like, oh, I'm done with that. You know, as my son lives into his life, I still grieve. And just the second threshold is the threshold that I call impasse. And here's what happened there for me just recently. So impasse is when I come to the place on my journey where I just don't know what to do, when all my resources, all my practices seem inadequate. And so when I turned 63, that's 2.5 years ago now, I think it was, I was just getting ready to resign from the church where I was a pastor for 18 years. The same day that I was telling the leadership that I was resigning, I got the diagnosis of prostate cancer. And I was thrust into, I'm not in control. I never was in control, but that really surfaced. And so there was grief around that, having to let go of my capacity, you know, my good practices, my best intentions, my big, hairy, audacious goals, what I was going to do in the next period of my life in order to let something new happen. And that was grief. And then the third encounter, third threshold that I tend to kind of go back and forth around and encounter grief there, is that between an actual encounter with the divine, an ecstatic encounter, or Cynthia Bourgeault frames as instastasis, you know, that you're actually witnessing yourself and believing and knowing that you know that God is present in your life. And then you can't hold on to it. It's beautiful, but it propels me into my world with some kind of action. And there I meet grief again. Because it's like I want to stay in that place of, I don't know, equanimity, but I move into the messiness of my life. And I pause there to, again, how can I learn from these thresholds in my life? So I just wanted to bring that forward as opportunities, as, again, to become apprentices to grief. I'm complete.
Thank you, Terry. Who's next?
I could, you ready to go, Glenn?
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, let me see if words can find me here. I was not expecting this time to be a time of recording, so I'm kind of going on the fly here. And so COVID for me didn't really come as a surprise. So it started up, I think, in March or April of last year. But in January, actually January of last year, on January 3rd, I got a diagnosis that I had Burkitt's lymphoma. And it's a blood cancer, and it's very aggressive. It started, you know, just like with a little, the size of a grain of sand. And within a few weeks, it was the size of a fist. And before I started getting treatment, it actually hit my leg. And in one night, my left leg gained 10 pounds. I woke up the next day 10 pounds heavier, and my left leg 3 times the size of what it was the night before. And I started on a very rigorous round of chemo, and the doctors, this was at National Institute of Health, where our famous COVID doctors had come from. And it was a very experienced team, and they said that if I survived the treatment, I might be okay. But they also said that I had to be very careful, because what could take me down is just a cold. So even before COVID came, you know, my wife and I and our whole family, we were in isolation pretty much, you know, from January on. And then when COVID hit, it was like a double dose. It's kind of like now the whole the whole world has been there. But I guess what I would say, there's a poem that meant a lot to me during that time. It's a poem by Rumi. Be helpless, dumbfounded, unable to say yes or no. Then a stretcher will come from grace to gather us up. So let us rather not be sure of anything. Then miraculous beings come running to help. Crazed, lying in a zero circle, mute, we shall be saying, finally, with tremendous eloquence, lead us. When we've totally surrendered to that beauty, we shall be a mighty kindness. And I think for me too, Terry, that time was a time of impasse. The second week of each cycle, these 6 3-week cycles, I was literally on the floor, and all of my regular practices for trying to stay connected to myself, they just fell apart. And I felt I was just helpless and on the floor. And I began some practices through the direction of Cynthia Bourgeot. And there was one practice in particular, one called the Make Strong exercise and one called the Lord Have Mercy exercise. And I literally prayed that exercise almost every day, for months. And what I discovered is that, even if some of my ways of trying to come back to myself were failing, that my helplessness did call the helpers. And that was a liminal time for me. It felt like it was a time of being, a time of pure being. I couldn't really do anything, and I still live somewhat in the reverberations of that, but I'm also aware that how life can take me back over. And I feel like I need to do more grieving. And I know that words don't get me there. And I'm hoping that I can construct some of my own kind of personal rituals for some unfinished grief that I've had with my mom's early death that's kind of dribbled out over the decades. But I feel like a beginner in grief, and maybe that's what it's meant to be.
Thank you, Bob. Can you tell us a little bit about your Make Strong exercise and the Lord Have Mercy exercise?
Well, the Lord Have Mercy exercise was one that it's a fourth way exercise, and it was given by a guy named Gurdjieff. And it was a sensation exercise of bringing attention, into the left arm and breathing that prayer into the left arm or into the right arm. And then moving sensation to the right leg and breathing that prayer into it. And then going to my left leg and then to my right arm or left arm. Somebody told me that the original Greek for Lord Have Mercy, Kyrie eleison, it meant to womb me, O God. Feed me in the womb. And there was this kind of when the helpers did come, it felt like it was medicine to me, because there would often be a whole body response. I had a lot of people praying for me, and I don't know if it was imagination or not, but sometimes I could often even feel like I could recognize somebody's energy signature showing up for me and helping me. I wish I could live at that frequency more often. And but that was a time of, living as if it was the last year of my life. And it's not a bad way to live.
And the Make Strong exercise is something that you do?
Well, yeah. And that was really just trying to unite mind, heart, and body, and to make all three of those centers strong within me. And that often brought a whole body response that felt like medicine to me as well.
Okay. Thank you, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
Glenn, how about you?
Yeah. Well, grief has been a lifelong pursuit in terms of my attempt to get closer to it without feeling that it could annihilate me. Because way too early in my life, I had to experience a grief that was so devastating that I could not allow it. And I think from that point on, I found a way to package it, diminish it, think my way through situations. And keep myself buffered from grief. So this experience, for me, grief was always tied to longing for something I could not have. And it's the price, in a way, that I think we pay for loving. And so I think this process of moving through what COVID has brought is repeated hopes that have been dashed, repeated anticipations and reuniting that have been foiled again, thwarted again. For me personally, I live quite a distance from my children, and all 4 of my grandchildren live in Montana, and I could not see them. And I even had a grandchild born in the middle of the pandemic, and I have always been there immediately after the birth of my grandchildren. And in this case, I couldn't do it. And there's several levels, I think, of this in relation to the brotherhood of Illuman for me too. On one level, you know, I felt like I was trying to protect myself from exposure and risk and vulnerability at a higher age. And then at another level, it was, how do I see people and protect those close to me that I would be potentially exposing? And then with Illuman, it's that everything that we do that has created our foundation and our connection has been through these shared gatherings where we really are physically present with each other, and that we hear the sounds of drums that don't work well on Zoom, that we actually embody rituals that become hollow on Zoom. And that I've grieved each of those situations, that despite our valiant efforts to preserve Illuman through all of our Zoom gatherings, and I am grateful for the technology, we can't quite achieve what really had created the foundation of our connection, which were those in-person gatherings. So even this Soularize coming up, we were really almost there. It was planned with every expectation that everything was getting better and that we were going to all be together. And a lot of us were talking about how we couldn't wait to hug each other and smell each other or whatever else we could. And, you know, and once again, we're thwarted, and the grief isn't over. It's kind of like being sent to prison and waiting for parole and expecting it, and you think you're close to it, but then something happens and you can't get out that day. So this experience has also brought forward a time for us in Illuman to really self-reflect and see who we want to be as Illuman. We can look at all of the things that are not really ideal, particularly the whatever way we mirror our culture in terms of the whiteness of Illuman. It's given us an opportunity to really deeply self-reflect while in the grief of the loss. So there's been a gift of that. I look forward. I really am appreciative that we keep at it. We keep going, we keep trying, and we keep having these virtual councils, and it shows me the strength and the foundation of Illuman. And so I do know that we will continue to get through this, and we will connect, and it'll even be sweeter as a result.
Glenn, do you
I'll
have
stop there.
David Waite's poem, The Will
Oh
of
yes, and you know, this poem really speaks to Well, I'll just read it. It speaks for itself. It's called The Well of Grief. Those who will not slip beneath the still surface on the well of grief, turning downward through its black water to the place we cannot breathe, will never know the source from which we drink, the secret water, cold and clear, nor find in the darkness glimmering the small round coins thrown by those who wished for something else.
So as you think about the ways that you have grieved and tried to stay connected, what surprises have you had? What's been surprising to you in your response, or maybe some of the risks you've taken or decisions that you've made?
It surprises me when I encounter grief, just the surprise of grief. I can't put grief on the calendar. There might be a loss, like I said, and okay, I know grief is coming, then it hits me. It just surprises me when I least expect it. And so that's one surprise. The other is, again, that some paradoxical way, I actually feel more alive. It's grace, mercy. There's just an aliveness in my heart that maybe it's because I tend to live in my head a lot, and grief opens up my heart. And maybe that's the round coins that David White speaks of. It's been an invitation for me to deepen my practice and my sense of calling. And so I've just really leaned in with deepening practice and offering what I can to be in service to the world. I don't think I would have done that without some of the thresholds that have come my way, our way.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak to that? What's been surprising for you?
I like it's really true for me too, that what I deeply grieve are those things I had no preparation for. And it cuts through everything, and it's the most deeply disruptive, creates a deep hole, but somehow that's really been the largest portal and opportunity of my life. So Tara Brach talks about the Lakota people's belief that those who are grieving are closest to the line between earth and spirit because of the deep vulnerable opening that they've had to face, and that those are the people that others approach for help during their time of grief. It's not the way our culture looks at that, but so the paradox of grief is a surprise in itself. That which feels like it could obliterate us is offering us our greatest possibilities of connecting with the divine and opening us up deeply. Say that.
You're on mute, Bob.
My 19-year-old grandson is in the house and he doesn't know I'm recording, and I don't know if you can hear his loud music playing through through the door. I have a little place here where I can be quiet. I'm recalling something that Parker Palmer wrote, where he says the soul is like a wild animal, tough, resilient, savvy, self-sufficient, and yet exceedingly shy. if we want to see a wild animal, the last thing we should do is go crashing through the woods, shouting for the creature to come out. But if we're willing to walk quietly into the woods and sit silently for an hour or two or three at the base of a tree, the creature we're waiting for may well emerge. And out of the corner of an eye, we'll catch a glimpse of the precious wildness we seek. I think grief is like that for me. You know, I need to slow down. Words don't get me there. A mountain, a stream, and it's something that's unbidden. I'd like to be better at creating grief rituals for myself, and I think I could benefit from them, and I'd be interested in learning from other men that have, you know, created kind of like their own homebrewed grief rituals. I think that could benefit us all.
Yeah. I'm in the last months of my ministry as a full-time parish priest in the church that I've been serving for almost 28 years now. And so I've been in a state of anticipatory grief. And then, of course, for me, relationship is everything. And, you know, being able to be with my parishioners and people that I'm close to, and having to do it by Zoom is not quite the same. Well, it's certainly not the same. But I think one of the surprises for me has been how it's stimulated me to try to think in new ways and creatively to make connections. And one of the gifts in that, for example, is we pivoted to Sunday Zoom worship for weeks and weeks and weeks before we could be back in person again. All of a sudden, there were all these people who had sort of loose connections with the parish or had been part of the parish in years gone by, but had moved away for whatever reason. All of a sudden, these people are now Zooming in, and they're there every Sunday from Colorado and northern part of Maryland or South Carolina or New York or Maine or wherever it is. And it's rekindled all of those relationships. And that's been one of the gifts that has emerged for me in the context of this pandemic. That's a wonderful part. So what are some particular strategies that you've used to get through that maybe others can pick up on?
Something that always helps me is being involved in a natural setting, taking wanders in which I go out into the natural world with the intention of actually deepening my feeling of my own grief. Because in that kind of setting, I can do whatever I want. I don't need to worry about whether I'm going to be alarming someone if I wail or if I want to yell about something or just howl. I really feel like it can hold me. It can hold me there. And then I also can seek places in the world, in the natural world, in which I can see there's been loss, there's been damage, there's been devastation to the land or tree, and yet somehow it was not the end of the story. And in fact, it's just been incorporated and built upon and lived around. And that always gives me a larger sense of where I'm headed to. So that's one aspect of my self-regulation, is the natural world.
Yeah, I'm in alignment with that too, Glenn. I try to get out in the woods almost every day, and with intention of just being healed, you know, by Gaia, by the earth. You know, Bob said words don't get him there. to grief. And I hear that, and I need words. I need to express my grief in community with a friend. You tell me your sorrow and I'll share mine. It reminds me of another little Denise Levertov poem where she writes, "To speak of sorrow works upon it, moves it from its crouched place, barring the way to and from the soul's hall." So when I'm on a threshold and I'm moving from one thing to another and encountering grief there, I look around and say, who's with me here? Who are my allies on this journey? Because I need to both be listened into being and to listen others. And boy, this is a planetary initiation that we've begun and are moving into. And so this is the work, brothers, that we're called to. So again, to be apprentices to this. Yeah.
Thank you, Terry.
Yeah, it is a paradox, isn't it? Because without words, we can't be connected to each other, and yet we have to. If the words are just in the head, they just don't get us there either. I mean, for me, part of my grief work has been reanimating my own body. I grew up with a lot of body shame, and recovering my own embodiedness has been a long journey. And I think part of my inability to grieve, or some of my movement to learning how to grieve is, when I can locate the grief within my body. And so I've been doing a lot of sensation work, and of course, hiking or movement, that's all really good for me too. And there's actually a lot of really good sensation, attention-based exercises that can be worked with that bring the body back online. And at least for me, I'm convinced that this is the doorway to presence for me. It begins with the deepening of sensation and the growing sense of my own inner body helps to root me, with, to activate feeling and also to stay present to myself. So a lot of my work is in that arena. I'm not sure that all of us are, maybe we all need a different kind of work, but for me, that's been really a restorative work.
Thank you. Before we come to a close, tell us something that you've experienced in the last year and a half that's brought you great joy.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, John, because it just brings to mind a beautiful poem by Mary Oliver, "We shake with joy," or "We shake with grief. What a time they have, these two housed as they are in the same body." We shake with joy, we shake with grief. What a time they have, these two housed as they are in the same body. So I have seen, as I allow myself to feel, instead of kind of being paralyzed with fear of being consumed by grief, and not only my own grief, but really leaning into the big grief right now without shutting down. Somehow, in some way, joy meets me there, and it isn't happiness. It's not that, it's not optimism. It's something more. Joy doesn't even quite capture it, but it's a knowing that I know that I know. I guess that's what joy is, I'm complete.
Thank you.
For me, I think that the more that I am willing to allow my grief and sit with it and feel it fully, the more I am able to be with another who is grieving, who is in pain, who I can be present with. And to be with someone at that level is a kind of connection that is inherently joyous. So this experience offers an opportunity to sit more deeply into that grief, which can really provide a deep connection. I think there are people who believe that grief should be experienced communally, shared. And I think my own personal experience of being able to sit with others' grief without trying to shut it down or offer them platitudes or suppress the expression of it is a real gift that only comes from my ability to sit through it in myself.
Oh,
So this goes back a bit, John, but one of the most joyous periods of my life was the months that I was battling cancer. And I think that partly it was that way because I wanted to find a way to bring my grandkids into the experience in a way that they would not be afraid of. And so we started, so my grandkids, they range from, at that point, it was like 18 down to 6 years old. And so it started with a party where I shaved off all of my hair. And, you know, my son and four of his kids are living in Hungary. And we had this Zoom encounter where we're playing this riotous music and they're watching me shave my head and they're cheering for me. And they're all saying, oh, we're going to chop off our hair too. But, and I tried to make it playful. And I gave all of my kids an assignment. You know, one of them, I collected a lot of Snoopy paraphernalia. You know, people would, for some reason, Snoopy and the Red Baron became my image. And I gave my youngest grandson this assignment that to find me some Snoopy goggles. And there was a person that painted this for me. So he found some Snoopy goggles. And I said, whenever I put these Snoopy goggles on, that means that I'm in really bad shape, you know, that you need to. And I said, when I send you this picture of me with the Snoopy goggles, it means I can't even talk, but I want you to go outside and shout in your loudest voice, helpers come, grandpa has need of you, grandpa has need of you. And so we did that on a number of occasions. When I'm down on the floor, and one of the consequences of this chemo was it erodes your inner body cavity. So I couldn't eat or drink or defecate, you know, for 5 or 6 or 7 days, and all these internal body sores, not even being able to talk or eat or drink. I would send Sebastian, you know, a picture of me with the goggles on, and he would send me back a little clip of him running outside and calling for help. And that really helped me, you know, and it allowed me to get through what could have been a really hard time with a lot of joy and a sense of connection. There was such a sense of community and connection with people, and playful. It was playful. Even though it could have been the last year of my life, it still seemed like it could be engaged that way.
beautiful. What I heard was grace,
Yeah. It was
tremendous
great.
grace.
Yeah.
You know, as I come in, my church sits on a point of land surrounded by water on 3 sides. The St. Mary's River, which is a tributary that runs down into the lower Potomac that flows into the Chesapeake Bay. And over the years, I've managed to convince my parish that we have a ministry of place because it's spectacularly beautiful. And as I'm moving into the last 6 months of my ministry here, I've been more intentional about going out into the churchyard and down to Church Point and just going out and being there and sitting and in the churchyard near the memorial gardens and reflecting on the people that I've known, that I've buried out there, or that I've married in the church or out in the yard. And the other day I went down to Church Point, and there was a stunning blue heron standing on a rock, and I was maybe 10 feet from him or her. And I stood there for 10 minutes talking to this bird, and you know, it craned its neck and it looked at me and it turned and it preened, and then I guess its partner flew over and then it took off and followed the partner. But I just, you know, I just was trying to take in everything so that it's so deeply imprinted on my being as I step away from it. But that gives me joy. And that surprised me, frankly, that I found myself experiencing a sense of joy. So I think we're coming up.
I hear that is grace also.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we're coming up on our time. Are there any parting thoughts that you'd like to share before we call it a day?
I would just like to express my gratitude to Illuman. It's made a huge difference in my life. And I look forward to the continuing evolution and adaptive ability. It's not the correct word, for us to evolve with the changing circumstances around us.
Thank you, Terry.
I am grateful to the love that I've experienced over the years in Illuman that is holding us through this.
Oh.
I read a short poem.
Sure.
Because it feels to me like we're all in this soup, you know, together, kind of boiling away. And Hafiz has this little snippet about the chickpea to the cook, where the chickpea is leaping over the rim of the pot where it's being boiled. Why are you doing this to me? But the cook knocks him down with the ladle. Don't you try to jump out. You think I'm torturing you? I'm giving you flavor so you can mix with spices and rice and be the lovely vitality of a human being. Well, eventually the chickpea will say to the cook, boil me some more, hit me with the skimming spoon. I can't do this by myself. And the cook says, I was once like you, fresh from the ground. Then I boiled in time, boiled in the body, 2 fierce boilings. To become servant, let your animal soul grow powerful. Tame it with practice. Then boil some more and boil once beyond that. Then you become servant and teacher.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. Feels like we're in a bit of a soup together, and I hope the fierce boiling can make us better beings on this planet.
I pray for that too.
Yeah.
For me, Illuman has introduced me to the most amazing men. I'm looking at 3 of my dear friends and mentors and guides. You have touched my heart in a powerful way, as so many of the men that I've met through Illuman that I never would have met otherwise. And so I'm grateful. I'm grateful. And I thank you. And I think we can turn off the recording now.
Well, brothers, that was a journey watching that again for me, and hopefully it was helpful for you too. This is a point in our session in which we're going to use one of the tools of Illuman, which is nature. And for our transformative experience and experiencing grief with the help of the container of nature. So we are inviting you to spend the next hour in a wander, in some way, in a place that is not your usual structure of human structure. And I invite you all to refrain from conversation with other people during this time so that you can have this time to yourself. And so you can listen to the quietest voices within you, the ones that our culture and conditioning hurries us through, and particularly that part of us that is holding our grief. And so this is an opportunity to go out into a natural setting. And even if it's only your backyard, any place that has other than human beings. And as you enter a place like this, move into it with intention. And the intention would involve imagining a threshold that you're walking over or through that allows you to signal yourself that you're changing your consciousness, that you're changing your usual state of consciousness. And you're inviting in your own experience of grief. And it might be helpful if you're able to find a place outside, even in your backyard. As I said in the video, a place that might have some evidence of damage, some evidence of loss, some evidence of exploitation by human extraction, some place of litter. And that kind of place can help hold and mirror grief and allow it to come forward even more fully. So I invite you to go on such a wander and reflect on your own grief. This is a time to make it experiential for you in terms of identifying it, what your losses are, what you're holding in grief, how you're facing your grief and processing it, and what you're hoping to find in the days ahead from your grief. Once you return in about an hour to this room, you will be able to go into small groups of councils where there will be deepening prompts to fully, to bring this story inside yourself more out into the realm of others and sharing. So I ask, by the way, that those of you who have had experience as stokers, have had experience as carrying councils, to identify yourself by putting an asterisk in front of your name on the screen, or if it's easier for you to just identify yourself in the chat, so that when you're sent to breakout rooms upon return, we have some way of knowing who can feel comfortable and willing to carry a counsel. So it is, and I suggested that when you're out, that you bring something, a notebook or a journal, so you can record some of your reflections that might help you have access to speaking once you return to council. It's 19 minutes after the hour now, so I'm thinking that, again, around 19 minutes after the hour or so, 20 minutes after the hour, whatever time zone you're in, is when you return to this main room before you're broken out into councils. Any questions? Okay. Thank you. I will see you in an hour.
And brothers, you don't have to leave the room. You can just leave your camera on, or you can turn the video off if that is easier for you. Whatever's easiest. And we'll see everybody back here in an hour. Thank you.